Get your hands off me. I don't need help from a civilian. Colonel Marcus Blackwell slammed his fist against the intake desk so hard the clipboard clattered to the floor. His face twisted in fury, sweat beading at his temples, despite the hospital's cold air. Every nurse in the corridor froze. The young orderly who'd reached for his arm stepped back like he'd touched a live wire. Marcus's jaw was clenched tight enough to crack teeth, his entire body radiating something between agony and rage. And he wasn't going to let anyone in that building forget it. That was the moment Elena Torres walked in. Quiet, unhurried, like she'd seen exactly this before. And somehow what happened next in that hallway would change both of their lives forever. If this story moves you, please subscribe to our channel and follow along until the very end. And drop a comment telling us what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story can travel. The admissions desk at Naval Medical Center Pearl Harbor had seen its share of difficult patients. Combat veterans with missing limbs who refused painkillers on principle. Retired officers who corrected the medical staff's terminology mid-examination. Men and women who had spent decades being told that asking for help was weakness and who carried that belief into every room they entered, including this one. The staff had protocols for all of them. Quiet voices, gentle redirection, extra time. But Colonel Marcus Blackwell was something else entirely. He came through the front doors at 7:42 in the morning, walking the way a man walks when every single step is a negotiation with his own body. Stiff, deliberate, each movement controlled with a kind of precision that screams discipline rather than ease. His dress uniform was immaculate, chest full of ribbons, silver hair cropped close, jaw set like concrete. He was 58 years old and looked every one of those years in the sharpest possible way. Not aged, but seasoned, forged, the kind of face that had been through fire and come out harder for it. He stopped at the desk and looked at the young woman behind it the way a senior officer looks at a private who's holding the wrong form. "Colonel Marcus Blackwell," he said. "I called ahead. I was told there would be someone waiting." The young woman, whose name tag read Specialist Dana Phelps, glanced at her screen and clicked twice. "Yes, sir, Colonel. We have your file. If you can just take a seat in the waiting area, a nurse will be—" "I don't sit in waiting areas," Marcus said. Not loudly, not dramatically, just flat, the way a fact is delivered. "I was told there would be a physician waiting, a military physician." Dana blinked. "Sir, the attending on your case is Dr. Reeves, and he's finishing with another patient. It should only be about—" "How long?" "Maybe 15 minutes, sir." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Not anger yet, something quieter and more dangerous. Then he nodded once, very slightly, and moved toward the row of chairs along the wall. He didn't sit. He stood beside one of them with his hands clasped behind his back, spine perfectly straight, staring at the far wall like he was watching a horizon. Anyone paying attention could see what was really happening. The slight tremor in his right hand, the way his left leg shifted almost imperceptibly every 40 seconds, redistributing weight, the muscle working along his jaw. Colonel Marcus Blackwell was in serious pain, and he was fighting it with every tool available to a man who had spent 36 years learning how to override his own body's distress signals. He was losing. It had been building for months. That was the truth he'd told no one. The shrapnel, fragments from an IED strike in Sangin Valley, Afghanistan, 14 years ago, had shifted. The surgeons who'd originally extracted most of it had warned him. One piece, too close to the iliac vessels, had been left in place. A calculated risk. For years it had been manageable. Discomfort, stiffness, the kind of low-grade pain a Marine colonel categorizes as background noise and ignores on principle. But over the last 3 months, the background noise had become something else. Something that woke him at 2 a.m. Something that made him white-knuckle the steering wheel on his drive to base. something that had finally forced him through those hospital doors this morning, because last night, alone in his quarters, he had come frighteningly close to calling an ambulance. And that was a line Marcus Blackwell was not prepared to cross. So he'd driven himself, alone. At 6 a.m., he'd called ahead, spoken to an administrator, been told a physician would meet him. He had arrived with his file, his composure, and 36 years of authority packed into every line of his posture. And now he was standing in a waiting room like every other patient, listening to the fluorescent lights hum, and the pain was climbing in slow, deliberate waves up his left side, and he was not going to show it to a single person in this building. "Sir," the voice came from his left. He turned. She was perhaps 45, maybe a few years older, with dark hair pulled back simply, and eyes that were calm in a way that had nothing to do with being relaxed and everything to do with being practiced. She was wearing scrubs. Her ID badge said Torres, E-R-N. She was holding a chart, his chart, apparently, and she was looking at him with an expression that was professional and attentive and utterly, infuriatingly unintimidated. "I'm Elena Torres," she said. "I've been assigned to your intake. If you'd like to come with me, we can get you settled in an exam room, and I can start your preliminary assessment while you wait for Dr. Reeves." Marcus looked at her, then at the chart, then back at her. "You're a nurse," he said. "I am," Elena said. "I was told a physician would be. Dr. Reeves is finishing up with a patient. I'll be doing your intake assessment and vitals. That's standard procedure." "I'm aware of what standard procedure is," Marcus said. His voice had dropped slightly. "What I requested was a military physician, someone with combat experience, not," he paused just long enough to be pointed about it, "not a civilian intake nurse." Elena didn't blink. "I understand, Colonel. If you'd like to follow me to the exam room, we can. I'll wait for the doctor." The words were final, a door shutting. Elena looked at him for a moment, not flustered, not apologetic. She glanced down at the chart briefly, then back up at him. "Colonel, I've reviewed your file. I'd strongly recommend we don't wait. That's not your call to make. The shrapnel in your left iliac region has been flagged by your most recent imaging as having migrated approximately 4 millimeters since your last scan." She said it quietly, professionally, without drama. "That's significant movement, sir. Given your pain presentation right now, I'd like to assess your circulatory status before Dr. Reeves comes in. That's not an overreach, that's me doing my job." Marcus stared at her. For just a fraction of a second, barely visible, there and gone, something shifted in his expression. Not softness, something more like recalibration, like a man updating a threat assessment. Then it was gone, and the wall went back up. "I appreciate your thoroughness, Miss Torres," he said. "I'll wait for the doctor." Elena looked at him for another beat. Then she nodded. "All right, sir." She didn't leave. She pulled up a chair from the other side of the waiting area, set his chart on her knee, and sat down about 10 feet away from him. Not hovering, not watching him with that clinical, searching look some nurses got. Just present, working through his chart, pen moving, occasionally looking up, not at him, just up, the way people do when they're thinking. Marcus turned his gaze back to the far wall. The pain hit again, harder this time, radiating from his hip, up through his lower back and down the back of his left leg. His jaw clenched. His right hand behind his back curled into a fist. He breathed through it. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. Controlled. Disciplined. He'd breathed through worse than this. He'd breathed through a lot worse than this. He thought about Sangin Valley. That was always what he thought about when the pain got serious. Some men, he knew, use those memories to make themselves more afraid. He'd always use them differently, as proof. You survived that, you can survive this. But Sangin Valley was also a complicated memory, for reasons he'd never fully untangled, and after a few seconds he pushed it aside and went back to staring at the wall. "Your color's changed," Elena said. He didn't look at her. "I beg your pardon? In the last 4 minutes, you've gone a shade paler, and you've shifted your weight 3 times. Your pain is increasing." She wasn't looking at him when she said it. She was still looking at the chart. "I'm not guessing, Colonel. I can see it." The arrogance of it almost made him turn around and leave. Almost. Except that she was right about the pain, and some part of him, the small, locked-away part that had driven here alone this morning, because something was genuinely wrong, registered the accuracy of her observation with something uncomfortably close to relief. He said nothing. "How long have you been experiencing the radicular symptoms?" she asked, still looking at the chart. He said nothing. "The shooting pain down your leg," she clarified, unbothered by his silence. "Given the location of the retained fragment, it's likely intermittent, but today it seems more sustained. I don't recall authorizing a medical consultation from the waiting room, Miss Torres." "You haven't authorized one," she said simply. "I'm just talking." She turned a page in the chart. "Your last official visit was 14 months ago. That's a long time between check-ins for someone carrying a fragment that close to a major vessel. My personal medical schedule is not your concern." "It actually is," she said pleasantly. "That's more or less the definition of my job." Marcus turned to look at her then. He couldn't entirely help it. There was something about the tone, not challenging, not defensive, just level, that demanded a response. She met his gaze without flinching. Brown eyes, direct. The kind of direct that comes from years of looking at people in their worst moments and not looking away. "I want to be very clear with you," Marcus said. "I am not interested in being assessed, counseled, or observed by a civilian with no military background who has no concept of what I've been through or what my body can handle. I have been in combat situations your training cannot prepare you to understand. I have managed injuries that would hospitalize most people for months, and I am standing here, under my own power, perfectly capable of waiting for a qualified physician. What I am not interested in is your running commentary on my appearance from across the waiting room. Do I make myself clear?" The speech was practiced. He'd given versions of it before. It worked. It was designed to work, to shut down the conversation, establish hierarchy, and make the other person feel the full weight of the gap between their experience and his. It almost always worked. Elena listened to the entire thing. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "You were in Sangin Valley, 2010, Operation Moshtarak." Something went very still in Marcus's chest. "The IED strike was on a secondary road approximately 3 kilometers west of the forward operating base," she continued. Her voice hadn't changed. Still calm. Still professional. "You took fragmentation to the left hip and lower abdomen. You were conscious when they brought you in. You were trying to give orders." Marcus stared at her. "The corpsman who initially reached you did a good job with the tourniquet," she said, "but the internal hemorrhage was the real problem. That wasn't obvious from outside. You were losing blood faster than your pressure reading showed because the fragment had nicked the vessel wall rather than fully perforating it. Slow bleed. Easy to miss if you're not looking for it." She looked up at him then, directly. "I was looking for it," she said. The waiting room was very quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed. Down the hall, someone was rolling a cart with a squeaky wheel. Marcus's voice, when he found it, was different, lower. "What did you just say?" "I was the trauma nurse on the team that received you," Elena said. "Naval Medical Center, Camp Leatherneck, February 14th, 2010. You came in on a medevac at approximately 0340. You were conscious for the first 12 minutes. You told the team to stabilize Private First Class Dunmore before touching you." She paused. "Private Dunmore had a broken arm. You had a lacerated iliac vein." Marcus's mouth had gone slightly open. It closed. He looked at her, really looked at her, with the searching, recalibrating intensity of someone trying to place a face in a different context, 14 years and 1,000 miles from where it should be. I don't, he started. You wouldn't remember me, Elena said. You were in and out for most of it, and I've aged. A very small, dry smile crossed her face. We both have. You were in Leatherneck in 2010, Marcus said slowly. 14 months total, 2 deployments. She looked back down at the chart. The attending surgeon that night was Dr. Kaufman. He made the decision to leave the fragment rather than risk the vessel. I was the one who argued for the repair. He overruled me. She flipped a page. He was right, probably, given the equipment we had available. But I want you to know I argued for it. The pain hit again. This time Marcus actually moved. A short, involuntary shift to the right, one hand dropping from behind his back to grip the back of the chair beside him. He caught himself, straightened, but not before Elena had seen it. She was already standing. Exam room, she said, no question, no request. I'm fine, Marcus said, and even he could hear that it was too automatic, too fast, the kind of response that stops being convincing when the person saying it is gripping a chair to stay upright. I know you are, Elena said, and there was something in her voice that was not sarcasm and not condescension, something quieter and more serious. I also know you were fine in 2010, right up until you weren't, and I would really prefer not to do this twice. She held the chart under her arm and extended one hand slightly, not to touch him, just to gesture toward the hallway. Walk with me, Colonel. Marcus looked at her hand, then at the hallway, then back at her face. The thing was, and this was something Marcus Blackwell did not understand yet, because understanding it would have required a degree of self-examination he was not currently capable of. He had thought about that night, more than he'd ever told anyone, not constantly, but at certain junctures. When the pain had started worsening, he'd thought about it. When he'd finally called to make this appointment, he'd thought about it. He had no memory of her face. He'd been told afterward that there had been a nurse who'd caught the secondary bleed, who'd noticed his pressure dropping in a pattern that suggested internal hemorrhage before the scans confirmed it. He'd been told. He'd filed it somewhere in the part of his mind where he filed things he didn't fully know what to do with. Standing here now, looking at this woman who was holding his chart, and looking back at him with absolute steady calm, he felt something he had not expected to feel today. He felt recognized, not as a colonel, not as a decorated officer, as a patient, as a man who had been in serious trouble once before and had been seen, actually seen, by someone paying close enough attention to notice. It was uncomfortable. It made him want to push back harder. Instead, very slowly, he let go of the chair. I want to be clear, he said, and his voice had changed. Still controlled, but different. Less weapon, more wall. This is not an acknowledgement that I require assistance. Understood, Elena said. I am simply expediting the intake process. Of course. And when Dr. Reeves arrives, he will be the primary physician on my case. Absolutely. She was already walking. Marcus walked after her, and each step down that corridor cost him something he refused to name. And Elena Torres walked ahead of him without looking back. And behind them, the waiting room returned to its ordinary fluorescent hum. And the young specialist at the front desk watched them go with wide eyes and then very carefully went back to her screen. The exam room was small and white. Elena closed the door. She set his chart on the counter and snapped a blood pressure cuff off the wall hook with the practiced ease of someone who'd done it 10,000 times. Sit, she said. I prefer to stand. I know you do, Elena said. Sit anyway. He sat. She fit the cuff around his arm and inflated it. She watched the gauge. She released the pressure. She looked at the number. She did not change her expression, but she reached for the cuff again. What? Marcus said. Taking it again, she said. Why? Because I want to confirm the reading. She took it again, looked at the gauge. This time something very subtle shifted around her eyes. A focusing, a sharpening. "What is it?" Marcus said, not a question. "Your systolic is low," she said. "Low for anyone. Low for you, given your history and your fitness level. It's a concern." She set down the cuff and looked at him directly. "Are you experiencing any pain in your abdomen? Not your hip, higher up, around your left side." The pause before he answered was just long enough. "Some," Marcus said. "Since when?" Another pause. "This morning," he said, "before I came in." Elena nodded slowly. She turned to the counter and picked up the phone. She dialed 2 numbers. "This is Torres in exam 3. I need Dr. Reeves now, not in 10 minutes. Now." She listened for a second. "Tell him it's the Blackwell intake and to bring the portable ultrasound." She hung up. Marcus watched her. "You think the vessel is?" "I think we're going to take a look before I give you an answer," Elena said. She turned to face him, and her expression was composed and direct, and entirely without the false comfort that some people mistake for professional kindness. "What I know right now is that your blood pressure is dropping, you've had increasing abdominal pain, and there is a fragment of shrapnel millimeters from a major blood vessel that has been shifting for 14 years. Those things together are a combination I take seriously." "So do I," Marcus said. They looked at each other. 2 people who had been in rooms where the next 60 seconds mattered and knew what that felt like. "Colonel," Elena said. "Marcus." He blinked slightly at the use of his first name. "I need you to stay calm and stay still," she said. "Not because you're fragile, because movement increases your vascular pressure, and I need your pressure going in the other direction right now. Can you do that for me?" Marcus Blackwell, who had given orders in firefights, who had commanded men and women in the worst circumstances this country could put them in, who had spent 36 years being the person other people turned to when things went wrong. Marcus Blackwell looked at this woman who had once saved his life without him knowing it, and who might, if the numbers on that blood pressure cuff meant what she thought they meant, be about to do it again. "Yes," he said, simply, quietly, and somewhere in the word, in the single syllable of it, stripped clean of rank and pride and the elaborate architecture of a career built on never needing anyone, there was something else, something older, something that had been waiting, maybe since a medevac landed at 0340 in February 2010, and a nurse with dark eyes noticed a pattern in the data that no one else had caught. The door opened. Dr. Reeves came in with the ultrasound unit. He was a compact man in his 40s, military bearing, scanning the room with quick physician's eyes. He looked at Marcus. He looked at Elena. He read her face. "What do we have?" he said. "Possible vascular compromise," Elena said. "Retained fragment, left iliac. Pressure's dropping. Patient has new abdominal symptoms since this morning." She handed him the chart. "I want to look before we move." Dr. Reeves was already reaching for the ultrasound probe. He glanced at Marcus once, a quick professional assessment. "Colonel," he said by way of introduction. "Doctor," Marcus said. Reeves looked at Elena. "Good call on the call." Elena said nothing. She was already pulling on gloves. She looked at Marcus once, briefly, and what passed across her face in that moment was not a smile exactly. It was more like acknowledgement. The way 2 people acknowledge each other when they've arrived, together, at the edge of something serious. When the work is what matters, and everything else, rank, history, pride, all of it, falls away. Marcus met her eyes and held them. And in that exam room, with the ultrasound machine warming up, and Dr. Reeves unfolding the chart, and the fluorescent lights humming their ordinary indifferent hum, something shifted between them. Not friendship, not yet, not even fully trust, but the beginning of something, a crack in the wall, the first light through. The probe touched his skin, and Marcus breathed, and Elena watched the screen, and outside in the hallway the hospital went on being a hospital, and nobody out there knew that in exam room 3, something was happening that had started 14 years ago on a military base in Helmand Province, Afghanistan, in the dark, in the blood, in the hands of a nurse who had paid close enough attention to save a life, and who was, quietly, doing it again. The ultrasound probe moved slowly across Marcus's lower abdomen, and the room was so quiet that the soft mechanical hum of the machine sounded almost loud. Dr. Reeves's eyes were fixed on the screen. Elena stood at his left shoulder, arms crossed, watching the image with the stillness of someone who already had a theory and was waiting for the evidence to confirm or destroy it. Marcus stared at the ceiling. He had decided, somewhere in the last 4 minutes, that looking at the screen was not something he was prepared to do. Looking at the screen meant seeing something, and seeing something meant knowing something. And knowing something, in this particular moment, felt like a door he wasn't ready to open while lying flat on his back in a 6x10 exam room with a woman he didn't remember, but who apparently remembered him well enough to recite the exact coordinates of the worst night of his life. "Talk to me," Dr. Reeves said quietly. He wasn't talking to Marcus. "There," Elena said. She reached past him and touched the edge of the screen with one gloved finger, not touching the display itself, but indicating something just off-center. "See how the shadows moved? That's not where it was in the imaging from 14 months ago." Reeves leaned in. "How far?" "Further than the 4 millimeters in the file," Elena said. "Significantly further." Marcus's eyes moved to the ceiling tiles. One of them had a small water stain in the upper left corner, shaped vaguely like a boot. He focused on that. "Colonel," Dr. Reeves said, "I need to ask you a direct question, and I need a direct answer." "Go ahead," Marcus said. "Have you had any episodes of feeling faint or lightheaded in the last 72 hours? The boot-shaped stain on the ceiling tile was approximately 3 inches wide. "Colonel." "Once," Marcus said, "Wednesday evening. I attributed it to dehydration." Elena made a very small sound that was not quite a word and not quite a breath. It was the sound of a person confirming a suspicion they'd been hoping was wrong. "Did you fall?" Reeves asked. "No." "Lose consciousness?" "No." "Pain at the time?" Marcus closed his eyes briefly. "Yes." Reeves straightened up and looked at Elena over his shoulder. Something passed between them in that look that Marcus couldn't fully read, but that settled somewhere cold in his chest. "I want a CT with contrast," Reeves said. "Now, not in an hour." "Already put the order in," Elena said. Reeves looked at her. "When?" "Before you came in." There was a beat. Reeves almost smiled. "All right," he turned back to Marcus. "Colonel, I want to be straight with you. The fragment has moved more than we'd like. Given your blood pressure and the abdominal symptoms, I'm concerned we may be looking at a slow bleed from the vessel wall. That's not a catastrophic emergency right now, but the window between right now and catastrophic emergency is narrower than I'd prefer." Marcus opened his eyes. He looked at Reeves directly, the way he'd look at an intelligence officer delivering a field report. Processing. Assessing. "What are my options?" "Let's get the CT first," Reeves said. "Then we know what we're actually dealing with." "Best case." "Best case, it's a false alarm, and we adjust your management plan and send you home with a schedule." Reeves paused. "Worst case, we're going to surgery today." The word surgery landed in the room with a specific weight. Marcus didn't flinch, but his right hand, resting on the exam table beside him, slowly closed into a fist. "I have a briefing at 1400, Marcus said. Nobody in the room said anything. "I have a briefing at 1400 with the Pacific Fleet Commander," Marcus repeated. "It's been scheduled for 3 weeks. There are 7 other senior officers waiting on my presence." "Colonel," Reeves started. "I understand the situation," Marcus said. "I'm telling you the situation on my end." He sat up slowly, deliberately, the way a man sits up when his body is arguing against him and he's overruling it. "How long for the CT results?" 30 minutes for the scan, another 30 to read it properly." "Then let's not waste time." Marcus swung his legs over the side of the table and stood. The movement cost him. Anyone watching could see it, but he stood, and he was straight, and his face gave away nothing. Elena had moved to the door. She opened it and looked into the hallway, flagged down a transport aide without raising her voice, the way people do when they've been giving directions in hospitals long enough that urgency doesn't require volume. She looked back at Marcus. Wheelchair or walking? Walking, Marcus said immediately. Walking, Elena agreed, and the dry neutrality of her tone carried just enough awareness of the conversation they'd had 20 minutes ago to make Marcus's jaw tighten slightly. She held the door open. This way. They walked. Marcus walked with that same deliberate, controlled gait, and Elena matched his pace without appearing to, and Dr. Reeves fell in on the other side, and they moved through the corridor toward radiology with the kind of quiet urgency that hospital staff recognize instantly. The pace that says something is wrong, but we are not running because running creates panic, and panic helps no one. A nurse at the station glanced up as they passed, then looked again, tracking Elena's face, then went back to her work. Marcus said, low enough that Reeves wouldn't catch it, "You anticipated the CT order." "Yes," Elena said, "before you had enough information to justify it." "I had enough information," she said. "You had a blood pressure reading and a chart. And 14 years of watching that specific fragment on imaging," Elena said quietly. "And the fact that you drove yourself here alone at 6 in the morning rather than calling for transport. Men like you don't do that unless they're scared, Colonel. And the only thing that scares a man like you is something you can't fight your way out of." Marcus was quiet for 3 full steps. "That's an aggressive assessment," he said finally. "I've been told," Elena said. They reached radiology. The tech was already set up. Elena's order had come through and someone had moved. Marcus looked at the CT machine the way men look at things they don't want to need, with a complicated mixture of pragmatism and something older and less rational. He let the tech position him. He let Elena check his IV line. He stared at the ceiling again. "I need you to hold completely still," the tech said. "I'm aware of how CT machines work," Marcus said. "Yes, sir." Elena stepped back behind the glass. Through it, Marcus could see her standing with her arms crossed and her eyes on the screen. And something about the image, the glass between them, her watching him with that focused calm, was both reassuring and deeply uncomfortable. And Marcus could not have explained why either of those things was true. The machine started. He held still. He thought about the briefing at 1400. He thought about Vice Admiral Patterson, who had a gift for interpreting absence as weakness. He thought about the 7 officers in that conference room, and the stack of reports on his desk, and the 42 years of his life that had been constructed, brick by careful brick, around the principle that the mission does not pause for the man. Then the pain hit again, harder than it had all morning, sharp and sudden, and radiating from his left side in a way that was distinctly different from before. Not the familiar deep ache, but something acute, something with an edge. And for a fraction of a second, his breath caught. He held still. He did not make a sound. He stared at the ceiling. But his heart rate had jumped, and the monitors showed it. And behind the glass, Elena uncrossed her arms. The scan took 11 minutes. It felt longer. When the machine stopped and the table slid out, Marcus sat up and was careful, and was deliberate, and was completely controlled, and none of that stopped the sweat from having formed along his hairline during those 11 minutes. Elena came out from behind the glass. She looked at his face. "Pain change during the scan?" she asked. "Slight increase," Marcus said. "Mid-scan, it's passed." Her expression shifted almost invisibly. She turned to the tech. "Get Reeves the images as they process. Tell him not to wait for full reconstruction." "Got it." She turned back to Marcus. "Exam room 2, not 3. 2 is closer to the OR corridor." Marcus went still. "That's a precaution." "Everything I do is a precaution," Elena said. "That's the job. You're staging me closer to the operating rooms." "I'm being practical." "Elena," he used her name for the first time. It came out differently than he'd intended. less authoritative, more direct, something that lived in the space between those two things. What do you think the scan is going to show? She looked at him for a long moment. Outside in the hallway, a cart rolled by. Someone laughed at the nurse's station down the corridor. The ordinary sounds of a hospital doing its ordinary work. I think the fragment has compromised the vessel wall, she said. I think it's been a slow bleed for possibly several days, which explains Wednesday. I think the reason your pain changed during the scan is because movement matters now in a way it didn't 6 months ago. She held his gaze. I think we're going to be in an operating room before noon. Marcus heard all of it. He processed all of it, and then he said, with absolute evenness, my briefing is at 1400. Something crossed Elena's face. It wasn't frustration. It was something softer and more specific. The look of someone who recognizes a coping mechanism because they've watched enough people use it under pressure. Colonel, she said, Marcus, I need you to hear me. I hear you. No, she said, I need you to actually hear me. She took one step closer, not close enough to crowd him, close enough to make the conversation real. In 2010, I watched you spend the first 12 minutes after a near-fatal injury arguing about your men. You tried to send us away. You tried to postpone your own care until you'd satisfied yourself that everyone around you was handled. You almost died while we were debating it. She paused. I am not going to watch that happen twice. The corridor was quiet. Marcus looked at her, really looked at her, with the same focused, searching intensity he'd used earlier in the waiting room, trying to place her. And this time something surfaced. Not a clear memory, more like the shape of one. The darkness of a trauma bay. A voice, steady and specific in the chaos, calling out numbers, blood pressure readings, calling them out not with alarm, but with calm, corrective certainty. He hadn't seen a face. He'd been in and out, but he remembered the voice. You argued with the surgeon, he said slowly. You said the imaging was missing something. Elena was very still. You remember that. I remember a voice, Marcus said. I thought it was a dream. It wasn't. Another beat of silence, longer this time. He didn't listen to you, Marcus said. Not then, Elena said. He did eventually. When your pressure dropped the second time, he had no choice. That's when we found it. She was quiet for a moment. 40 minutes, Marcus. That's how long it took from the second pressure drop to the repair. 40 minutes is a long time when a vessel is involved. Marcus absorbed this. His jaw worked once, slightly. But it held. It held, Elena said. Just. They stood in the corridor outside radiology, two people separated by 14 years and every complicated thing that happened in them, and the hospital moved around them, and neither of them spoke for several seconds. Then Marcus said, What do you need from me? Elena let out a breath, just a breath, very quiet. I need you to come to exam room 2 and sit down and let me monitor your pressure while we wait for Reeves to read the scan. That's all. All right, Marcus said. They walked. Exam room 2 was smaller than 3. Marcus sat on the table without being told. Elena took his blood pressure again. She wrote the number down without saying it aloud, but Marcus watched her hand, watched how quickly she wrote it, and understood. It's lower, he said. Yes, Elena said. How much lower? She looked at him. Enough that I'm not leaving this room until Reeves gets here. Marcus nodded slowly. He looked at his hands for a moment, the hands of a 58-year-old Marine who'd spent 36 years in service, who'd built walls high enough to keep out most of the world, who'd driven himself to this hospital alone at 6 in the morning because asking for help was a kind of surrender, and surrender was a kind of dying. He looked at those hands, and something moved behind his eyes that wasn't pain and wasn't pride. In 2010, he said, the morning after the surgery, I asked the staff if I could speak to whoever had been on the medevac team. He paused. I was told the surgical team had rotated out, Forward deployment. He looked up. They said the nurse who'd flagged the secondary bleed had already gone back to her unit. Elena said nothing. I was given a name, Marcus said, but it was... He stopped, shook his head slightly. I filed a commendation through official channels. I don't know if it went anywhere. The system... Another pause. I wasn't sure it went anywhere. It went somewhere, Elena said quietly. He looked at her. I received it, she said, 8 months later, after I was back stateside. She had set down the pen. She was looking at him steadily, and there was something in her expression that was very, very carefully composed. It was the first commendation I'd received from a patient. I kept it. The silence that followed was the kind that comes after something real has been said. Not comfortable silence. Not uncomfortable, just real. And then Dr. Reeves opened the door, and he was walking fast, and he had a tablet in his hand, and his face told the story before his mouth did. We need to talk, Reeves said. He looked at Elena, then at Marcus. Both of you, right now. He turned the tablet around. The CT image was clear enough. The fragment, dense white against the gray gradient of tissue, was positioned in a way that made the situation unmistakable. And there, adjacent to it, a haze of density that had no business being there. That's blood, Marcus said, flat, certain. Yes, Reeves said. How much? Enough, Reeves said. It's slow, but it's active. The fragment has eroded through the vessel wall. Partial thickness. It's been bleeding for... He looked at Elena. Days, Elena said. At least 3. Marcus looked at the image on the tablet. He looked at it for a long time with the same expression he'd given field maps and intelligence reports and every difficult piece of information that had ever required him to make a decision under pressure. Processing, accepting the reality, moving to the next thing. Surgery, Marcus said. Today, Reeves said. Within the next few hours. I want to get vascular in. Dr. Nakamura is on call and she's excellent. But we're not waiting past noon, Colonel. This is not a negotiation. Marcus looked at Reeves, then at Elena, then back at the image. Call Patterson's office, he said. Not to either of them, more to himself. To the part of his brain that ran logistics automatically, that was already rerouting and adjusting even as the larger machinery of the moment ground forward. Have them push the briefing. He set the tablet down. All right. Reeves was already on his phone, stepping halfway out the door. I'll get Nakamura. Don't move him. The door half closed behind him. The room was very quiet again. Elena was checking his IV line, her movements efficient and practiced. Marcus watched her work. You knew this morning, he said, when you first saw me, in the waiting room, you knew it was this serious. Elena looked up. I suspected, but you knew. She was quiet for a moment. I've seen it before. The way you were standing, the weight distribution, the particular way the pain was tracking. She finished with the line. I've spent a lot of years learning to read what people's bodies say when their mouths are saying something else. And what was my body saying? Marcus asked. Elena looked at him directly. It was saying you'd waited too long, she said, and that you knew it. Marcus held her gaze, and then very slowly, he nodded once. Yes, he said, I knew. It was the most honest thing Marcus Blackwell had said to anyone in months, maybe longer. And the fact that he'd said it to this woman, here, now, that fact settled somewhere in his chest with a weight he didn't fully understand and wasn't going to examine right now. Not with surgery 3 hours away and Vice Admiral Patterson's office needing a call, and Dr. Nakamura somewhere in this building waiting to be summoned. But it was said, and it was true, and Elena Torres looked at him when he said it with an expression that was neither pity nor victory, just acknowledgement. The specific acknowledgement of someone who knew what it had cost and was not going to make it cost more. Okay, she said simply, and then she turned to prepare the room, and Marcus sat still and straight on the exam table. And outside the door, the hospital moved and breathed. And 3 floors up, the operating rooms were already being readied for someone who had driven himself here alone, in the early morning, in the dark, finally out of other options, finally arrived at the place where the walls came down, not because he'd chosen to lower them, but because something had simply pushed through. Dr. Nakamura arrived at 9:47 a.m. She was small, precise, and moved like someone who had never wasted a single motion in her professional life. She shook Marcus's hand, not the deferential handshake some physicians gave to high-ranking officers, the slightly too soft grip that acknowledged rank before the person, but a real handshake, firm and brief, the handshake of someone who was also very good at their job and knew it. "Colonel Blackwell," she said, "I've reviewed the imaging. I want to go over the procedure with you before we schedule the OR. Do you have questions before I start?" "Several," Marcus said. "Good," Nakamura said. She pulled up the CT on the tablet and walked him through it with the same directness she'd used in the handshake. No softening, no hedge language, just the anatomy and the problem and the proposed solution. The fragment would need to come out. The vessel wall would need to be repaired. Given the active bleed, the margin was real, but manageable. She'd done 17 similar procedures. She expected a clean outcome. "Expected," Marcus said. "I don't promise outcomes, Colonel. I promise competence and experience. The rest is biology." Marcus almost smiled. "Fair enough." Nakamura handed the tablet to a resident who had materialized behind her. "I want him prepped by 11:30. We go at noon." She looked at Elena. "You're staying on his case through pre-op?" "Yes," Elena said. Nakamura nodded once and was gone, the resident half jogging to keep up. The room resettled in her wake. Marcus looked at the door she'd just gone through. "I like her," he said. It came out sounding mildly surprised. "Most people do," Elena said. "Eventually." "She doesn't defer." "No," Elena said. "She doesn't." "Good," Marcus said. And then after a brief pause, "Neither do you." Elena looked up from the supply tray she was organizing. Their eyes held for a moment. Then she went back to the tray. It was 10:04 a.m. They had approximately 90 minutes before the OR, and Marcus Blackwell, who had never in his adult life spent 90 minutes doing nothing, was sitting on an exam table with an IV in his arm and nothing to do but wait, and the particular discipline required for that was a different kind of discipline than the ones he'd spent his career developing. It was harder, in some ways, harder than any of them. "Tell me something," he said. Elena glanced at him. "What do you want to know?" "After Leatherneck, where did you go?" She was quiet for a moment, organizing without really organizing, her hands moving with the habit of motion while the rest of her thought. "Second deployment ended in 2011. I came back stateside. Bethesda for 2 years, then Pearl Harbor." She set down a package of gauze. "I've been here 11 years. 11 years in one assignment," Marcus said. "I like it here." "That's not why," Marcus said. She looked at him. "People who've been deployed don't stay in one place for 11 years because they like it," he said. "They stay because they've found the thing that makes it possible to stay." Elena looked at him for a long moment. Something shifted very slightly behind her eyes. "The trauma ward," she said finally. "The work is good here. Complex cases. Veterans mostly. People who need someone who understands the context." She paused. "I understand the context." "Because you were there," Marcus said. "Because I was there," she agreed. A silence settled, not uncomfortable, the kind that comes between people who've said something real and are giving it space to land. Then Marcus said, 2 deployments. Where else besides Leatherneck?" "Bagram, 2008 to 2009. Then Leatherneck." She crossed her arms lightly. "You?" 7 deployments over 22 years, he said. "Iraq twice, Afghanistan 4 times. One that I'm not going to talk about." "I'm not asking," she said. "I know," he said. "I'm accounting for it anyway." She understood what that meant. The way veterans account for things. Inventory almost. Making sure everything is where it should be before something significant happens. She'd seen it before surgery many times. The recitation of history. The quiet audit of a life. "Do you have family?" she asked. "Someone we should call?" The question was clinical, standard pre-operative protocol, but it landed differently than it would have an hour ago, before the CT, before the word surgery had been spoken aloud. And Marcus heard the clinical version and the human version simultaneously. "My daughter," he said. "She's in San Diego. Her name is Claire." He reached into the pocket of his jacket, which was folded on the chair beside him, and produced his phone. He looked at it for a moment without moving. "She worries." "That's her job," Elena said. "She'll want to fly out." She probably should. Marcus still hadn't moved a dial. His thumb rested on the phone's dark screen. "She's 7 months pregnant." Elena said nothing. "Her husband is deployed," Marcus said. "Somewhere I also can't discuss. She's been managing alone for 4 months. If I call her—" He stopped, set the phone on the table beside him. "She'll worry, Marcus," Elena said, and her voice was quiet and level, and without a trace of the clinical professional now. "If the positions were reversed, if Claire were the one going into surgery and she hadn't called you, what would you want her to do?" The muscle in his jaw worked once. "That's not a fair comparison," he said. "It's exactly a fair comparison." He picked up the phone. He dialed. It rang twice. And then a young woman's voice, still slightly blurred with early morning, said, "Dad, it's barely 10 o'clock. Are you okay?" And Marcus Blackwell, who had briefed admirals without flinching, who had held his command voice steady in active firefights, who had not let his body language break once in 3 hours of worsening pain, Marcus Blackwell closed his eyes for just 1 second when he heard his daughter's voice. "I'm okay," he said. "I'm at the hospital. I need to tell you something, and I need you to stay calm while I do." Elena turned away to give him the room. She busied herself at the counter, listening without appearing to, the way nurses learn to be present without intruding. She heard Claire's voice pitch up through the phone. She heard Marcus steady it, calm, methodical, factual. "This is what is happening. This is what the doctor has said. This is what the expected outcome is." She heard Claire say something sharp and frightened, and she heard Marcus say, "I know, sweetheart, I know." She heard the word sweetheart and had to look at the counter for a moment. When Marcus finished the call, he held the phone in his lap for a moment without speaking. Then he set it down. "She's coming," he said. "Of course she is," Elena said. "I told her there was no need." "She's coming," Elena said again gently. Marcus nodded once. And then something happened that Elena had seen in this kind of room many times, but had not expected from this particular man. A very brief, very visible release of something. Not tears, not anything that dramatic, just a fractional softening in the lines around his eyes, a slight drop in the rigidity of his shoulders, a single exhaled breath that was longer than the ones before it. The armor didn't come down, but something in the foundation of it shifted. It was 10:23 a.m. The door opened. A nurse Elena recognized, Chen, from pre-op, leaned in. "Torres, Dr. Wallace wants a word. Says it's about the Blackwell case." Elena frowned very slightly. "I'll come out." She looked at Marcus. 2 minutes. She stepped into the hallway and pulled the door almost closed behind her. Chen was looking at her with an expression that was careful in a particular way. The way of someone delivering news they'd rather not deliver. "What is it?" Elena asked. "Director Holt is here," Chen said. "He came in early. Someone flagged the case, the CT order, the pre-op staging. He's saying you overstepped on the intake, that you should have waited for Reeves before ordering imaging." Elena was very still. The patient's blood pressure was dropping and he had active abdominal symptoms consistent with vascular compromise. "I know that," Chen said, I'm just telling you what Holt is saying. Where is he now? Talking to Reeves outside the OR scheduling office. Chen hesitated. Elena, you know how Holt is about protocol documentation. If the order wasn't formally signed off before, the order was medically necessary and time-sensitive, Elena said. If I'd waited for a formal consult, we'd be looking at a different outcome. She looked at the door to exam room 2, then back at Chen. Tell Holt I'll speak with him after the patient is in the OR. He's not going to like that. He doesn't have to like it, Elena said, and went back into the room. Marcus looked at her face when she came in. He read it the way he read field reports, quickly, looking for the thing underneath the surface presentation. Problem? He said. Nothing that matters right now, Elena said. That's not an answer. She looked at him. She could deflect. She was good at deflecting. Years of practice managing the amount of information a patient needed versus the amount that would only add to their burden. But Marcus Blackwell had spent 36 years reading people, and he was reading her right now with the full force of that, and she found, with a mild surprise, that she didn't want to deflect. My director has concerns about the pace of my intake decisions this morning, she said. It's a procedural issue. It'll be resolved. Marcus was very still. He has concerns about the CT order. Among other things, possibly. You moved fast, Marcus said, without waiting for full authorization. Yes, because waiting would have cost us time we didn't have. Yes. Something hardened in his expression. Not toward her, the hardening was directional, pointed somewhere outside the room. What's his name? Marcus. The director, what's his name? It's not your concern right now, Elena said firmly. What is your concern is that your blood pressure is still dropping, and I need to get another reading before pre-op, and I need you focused on the surgery, not on administrative. Elena. His voice was quiet, controlled, but it had weight. What you did this morning, the CT order, the pre-op staging, all of it, was it within your clinical judgment? Yes, she said, without hesitation. Was it the right call? Yes. Then no one is going to touch your job, Marcus said. I'll make sure of that personally. She looked at him for a moment. There was something in his expression that was not the hard command authority he'd walked in with this morning. Not the armor, not the weapon. Something underneath all of that. Something that recognized a debt and intended to pay it. Let's focus on getting you through the next 4 hours, she said. Then we can talk about the rest. He accepted that. Barely, but he accepted it. She took his blood pressure. She wrote the number down. She did not say it aloud, but Marcus watched her hand again. And this time he recognized the number by how quickly she moved after writing it. It's still dropping, he said. Slowly, she said. We're ahead of it. How far ahead? Far enough, she said. Nakamura knows. Reeves knows. The OR is being prepped. She set down the cuff. Marcus, look at me. He looked at her. You are not bleeding out, she said, with the specific, deliberate calm of someone who has talked people back from the edge of panic many times and knows exactly which words to use and how to place them. Your body is compensating. We caught this early enough to manage it. The surgery is straightforward for someone with Nakamura's experience. You are going to be fine. He held her gaze. He was quiet for a moment. You said that to me before, he said, in 2010. I remember that too. Not the words, the tone. Elena was very still. Right before I went under, he said, someone said something in that tone, that specific, I don't know how to describe it, that frequency. He shook his head slightly. I thought I'd imagined it. You didn't, she said quietly. What did you say? She was quiet for a long moment. I said, the surgeons have you. You did your job. Let us do ours. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus looked at her, and something in his face, something she had watched piece by piece over the course of this morning, completed its long, complicated movement. The wall didn't come down. It was more specific than that. One brick. One particular brick, in a very particular place, removed carefully and set aside. "I heard it," he said. "I heard you." "I know," Elena said. "You squeezed my hand." He blinked. "I don't remember that." "You were mostly under," she said. "But you did." The sound of a gurney in the hallway. Voices, brief and professional. The ordinary percussion of a hospital in motion. And then the door opened, and it was not Chen, and it was not Reeves. It was a man in his late 50s, silver-haired, wearing administrator's clothes with the particular pressed precision that communicated authority without uniform, the hospital's version of a command posture. His name tag read, Director R. Holt. He looked at Elena with the expression of a man who had made a decision before entering the room. "Miss Torres," he said, "I need a word." "Director Holt," Elena said. Her voice was composed. "I'd prefer to have that conversation after." "I'd prefer to have it now," Holt said. His eyes moved to Marcus briefly. A quick assessment, a slight recalibration of tone, the acknowledgement of rank without any real adjustment to the message. The imaging order this morning was placed before formal physician consultation was documented in the system. That's a protocol violation, regardless of the clinical outcome. The patient was presenting with dropping blood pressure and acute abdominal symptoms, Elena said. Every minute of delay increased the risk of... "Protocol exists for a reason, Ms. Torres," Holt said. "I understand you have a history with this facility and with complex cases, but unilateral clinical decisions made outside the documentation chain create liability." "Excuse me." The voice came from the exam table. Quiet, not loud, not dramatic. But it was the voice of a man who had spent 3 decades making other people stop talking simply by opening his mouth, and it worked now with the same reflexive efficiency it always had. Holt stopped mid-sentence. Marcus looked at him with the full, measured attention of someone who is about to say something that will only need to be said once. "This nurse," Marcus said, "identified a life-threatening vascular complication in the time it took your duty physician to finish with his previous patient. She ordered imaging that confirmed an active bleed. She staged me correctly. She anticipated every clinical development before it happened. And she did all of it with the kind of judgment that your protocol documentation exists to protect in the first place." He paused. "If her instincts this morning had been slower, or if she'd waited for your paperwork chain to catch up to the emergency, I would not be going into an operating room. I would be in your emergency department in crisis, or I'd be dead in your parking lot." Another pause. "So whatever conversation you came in here to have, I'd strongly suggest you reconsider it." Holt blinked. He looked at Elena. He looked at Marcus. "Colonel," he started. "I'm not finished," Marcus said. Holt closed his mouth. "I will be filing a formal commendation for Nurse Torres' actions this morning through both this facility's administrative chain and through the military liaison office for this medical center," Marcus said. "If I become aware that any disciplinary action has been taken against her as a result of decisions that directly saved my life, I will be having a very different and considerably less polite conversation with the Pacific Fleet Surgeon General, who I have known personally for 14 years. He held Holt's gaze. "Are we clear?" Holt stood very still for a moment. He was a man accustomed to being the authority in the room, and he was processing the specific experience of not being the authority in the room. And it was visible on his face in the way that adjustments to one's self-concept are always slightly visible. "I'll review the documentation," Holt said finally. "You do that," Marcus said. Holt left. The door closed behind him with the quiet precision of a man who was not going to give anyone the satisfaction of a slam. The room was very still. Elena stood with her arms at her sides, looking at the closed door. Her expression was composed. Her hands, Marcus noticed, were absolutely steady. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "Yes," Marcus said. I did. She turned to look at him, and in her face was something he hadn't seen there before. Not in the waiting room, not during the CT, not in any of the last 3 hours. Something that lived underneath the professional composure. Something she'd had very good reasons to keep there. Gratitude, yes, but more than that, recognition. The particular recognition of someone who has spent a very long time being competent in rooms where competence was not enough, where you had to fight to have your judgment respected, where the work was right but the documentation chain lagged and the authority defaulted to someone with a different title. She had been in those rooms. She had fought those fights quietly, mostly the way people fight when they don't have a colonel in the room to make the point louder. Today she had. "Thank you," she said, quietly, directly, no performance in it. "Thank you," Marcus said, "for 14 years ago, and for today." They held each other's gaze across the small room for one long, real moment. Two people who'd been through something, two somethings, separated by years, connected by a thread neither of them had known was still intact. Then Elena moved, because that was what Elena Torres did. She moved forward, always, because forward was where the work was. "Pre-op in 20 minutes, she said. "I need to walk you through what to expect when you get to the OR bay. And I need another blood pressure." She came to the table, reached for the cuff. "And then I need you to stop talking to hospital directors and conserve your energy, because Nakamura is going to need you cooperative, and that means calm." "I'm perfectly calm," Marcus said. "You are the least calm person I have treated all year," Elena said, fitting the cuff around his arm. "And I mean that as a compliment." His blood pressure was lower again. She saw it, and her expression did not change. She made a note, stepped out briefly, spoke quietly to Chen in the hallway, came back in. "What was that?" Marcus asked. "I asked Chen to let Nakamura know we may want to move the schedule up by 15 minutes, Elena said. "Precautionary." "How much lower?" "Enough that I'd rather have you on the table at 11:45 than noon," she said. She looked at him steadily. "This is still manageable, Marcus. I'm not telling you it isn't, but we're going to move a little faster." Marcus nodded, and then he did something Elena did not expect. He reached out and rested his hand briefly on her forearm. Just for a second, the way a person reaches for something solid when the ground has been shifting, the way soldiers reach for the person next to them in the dark, not because they need to be held, but because the contact is its own kind of communication. Then he took his hand back. He said nothing. She said nothing. The gurney arrived 2 minutes later, and Marcus looked at it with the expression of a man who has lost every remaining argument with his own circumstances. And he moved toward it with his spine straight and his chin level, and Elena walked beside him into the hallway, and the hospital opened up around them, and ahead somewhere the operating rooms waited, and the work was not finished, and neither of them was done. The OR bay at Naval Medical Center Pearl Harbor had a specific sound. The layered mechanical breathing of equipment, the soft percussion of prep work, voices calibrated to efficiency rather than comfort. Marcus had been in trauma bays before, on the other side of the work, and he understood the choreography from that angle. Being on the gurney was a different education entirely. Elena walked beside him through the corridor, her pace matching the transport aides without effort. She had a clipboard. She was reviewing something, and yet every few seconds, without making it obvious, she checked him. Pressure of the IV line, color in his face, the rhythm of his breathing. He was aware of all of it. He'd spent a career learning to track what the people around him were actually doing versus what they appeared to be doing. And what Elena Torres was actually doing was monitoring him continuously while appearing to do paperwork. He found, to his own mild surprise, that he didn't mind. "Blood pressure on arrival to pre-op bay," she said to the aide without looking up, "was 94/62. Dr. Nakamura has been notified. She wants a repeat reading the moment we're set up." 94/62, Marcus said. "Yes," Elena said, "that's low." That's why we moved the schedule, she said evenly, and that's why Nakamura is already scrubbing. She looked up from the clipboard briefly. You're not in crisis, Marcus. You're trending in a direction we don't want. There's a difference. I know the difference, he said. Then stop narrating the numbers and focus on breathing slow, she said. Deep, controlled. You know how. He did know how. He'd been doing it since the corridor, since the gurney, since the moment his body had passed from a thing he commanded to a thing he was writing. 4 counts in, 4 counts out. The discipline of it was the same regardless of the context. They came through the bay doors at 11:38 a.m. Nakamura was already there. She had the particular focused stillness of a surgeon before a case. Not relaxed, but collected, like energy compressed into a tight space. She looked at Marcus on the gurney and then immediately at Elena. Pressure, she said. 94/62, 12 minutes ago, Elena said. Trending down approximately 2 points systolic every 15 minutes since 10 a.m. Nakamura did the math visibly, quickly, the way surgeons do arithmetic, not with pen and paper, but with the practiced calculator of someone who measures consequences in real time. We go now, she said. Not 11:45, now. She looked at the anesthesiologist, a lean man named Dr. Park, who was already at the head of the table. Park, you good? Ready when you are, Park said. Nakamura looked at Marcus. Colonel, any questions before we start? 1, Marcus said. Best case scenario, how long? 2 hours. Maybe less if the vessel wall is cleaner than the CT suggests. She held his gaze. I've done this before, more times than I need to count. I know, he said. Elena told me. Something shifted in Nakamura's expression, very brief, directed at Elena, not unfriendly, then back to Marcus. Then you know you're in good hands. Let's get you fixed. She moved to scrub. The room organized itself around Marcus with the efficient intimacy of people who do this daily. Park adjusting the anesthesia line, a scrub tech arranging the instrument tray, a circulating nurse completing the checklist. Marcus lay on the table and looked at the ceiling, which was the standard white acoustic tile of every medical ceiling he'd ever seen, and did his breathing, and did not think about the briefing that was currently happening without him, or about Vice Admiral Patterson's expression when he'd gotten the message, or about the 42 reports on his desk, or about any of the 1,000 obligations that had been the architecture of his daily existence for 36 years. He thought about Claire, 7 months pregnant, alone in San Diego, already on the phone with airlines. He thought about a medevac landing at 0340 in a desert in February. He thought about a voice that had said, "The surgeons have you. You did your job. Let us do ours." And how he had heard it through the sedation like a signal through static, just barely, just enough. Elena was beside him. She was completing the transfer checklist with the circulating nurse, going through it methodically, everything accounted for, every box checked. When she finished, she looked at him. "Anything you want to say before Park puts you under?" she asked. It was a clinical question, standard. She asked it the way she'd ask anyone. He looked at her for a moment, and then he said, "You kept my commendation." She blinked. "You said you kept it," he said. "The commendation, 8 months after Leatherneck." "I did," she said. "Why?" She was quiet for a beat. "Because it was the first time a patient had seen what I actually did," she said. "Most of the time, in those settings, in those conditions, the surgeon gets the outcome and the nurse gets the chart. You saw past the chart." She paused. That mattered. Marcus held her gaze. "It should have mattered then," he said. "On the night, I should have been more..." He stopped, recalibrated. "I should have handled this morning better." "You were in pain," Elena said. "That's not an excuse." "No," she agreed, "but it's a context." She looked at him steadily. "You're allowed to have context, Marcus." Park's voice came from above and behind, calm and professional. Colonel, I'm going to start the anesthetic in about 30 seconds. You'll feel a cold sensation in the IV, and then... I know what I'll feel, Marcus said, not unkindly. He looked back at Elena. Stay close, he said. I'll be here when you wake up, she said. I know, he said. I meant during. Something moved in her expression. I'm not scrubbing in, Marcus. I'm not on the surgical team. I know, he said again. Stay close anyway. She looked at him for one long, real second. Okay, she said. The cold moved up his arm. The ceiling began to shift in the specific, unhurried way of anesthesia induction. The way the world goes soft at its edges before it goes entirely. The last thing Marcus Blackwell saw before the lights went out was Elena Torres standing at the edge of the bay, arms at her sides, watching him with those steady brown eyes. Not afraid, not performing calm, just present, just there. It was enough. It was 11:44 a.m. Elena did not leave the bay. She stood at the periphery, outside the sterile field, not in the way, not hovering, and she watched. She had done this before, stood outside the glass or at the edge of a room, watching the surgeons work on someone she'd brought in. It was part of the job. It was the part of the job that nobody talked about much. The handoff, the standing outside the door, the waiting for the next piece of information that would tell you whether the thing you'd done that morning had been enough. Nakamura worked with the precision Elena had expected. Clean, controlled, efficient. The fragment came out at 12:19 p.m., smaller than it looked on the imaging, but positioned exactly where Elena had calculated, against the vessel wall at an angle that had clearly been grinding against it for years. A slow catastrophe in miniature. The vessel wall repair took another 35 minutes. Park kept the pressure stable. The room moved in its practiced, professional rhythm. And then, at 12:58 p.m., the rhythm changed. Elena felt it before she saw it, the almost imperceptible quickening of movement in the room, the way Nakamura's shoulders changed their set, the way Park's voice went up by half a register. Pressure's dropping, Park said. I see it, Nakamura said. Secondary bleed, give me suction. Elena's hands closed at her sides. Where? Nakamura said to herself, more than to the room. Systolic at 78, Park said, coming down fast. I have it, Nakamura said. Right there, suction. The suction. The specific urgent sound of it. Elena had heard that sound in Leatherneck in 2010, in a different room, in a different country, with the same underlying mathematics, the body losing what it could not afford to lose, and the hands of the people around the table racing against the clock of it. Another vessel? The scrub tech asked. Collateral branch, Nakamura said. Small, but it's letting go. Her voice was tight, not frightened, but pressurized. Park, I need that pressure up. Give me something to work with. Working on it, Park said. Elena had crossed the room before she'd consciously decided to. She stopped at the edge of the sterile field, close enough that Nakamura could hear her without raising her voice. He had a secondary collateral noted on the CT, Elena said. Left side, inferior to the main vessel. It was within 2 millimeters of the fragment path. Nakamura's eyes flicked up. Show me on the imaging. The circulating nurse pulled up the CT on the room display. Elena pointed, the right image, the right frame, the thing she'd seen that morning and had filed in the back of her mind in the category of things that might become relevant. It took 4 seconds. There, Nakamura said. She refocused, repositioned, and the room went very quiet in the way that rooms go quiet when the surgeon has locked onto the problem. Got it. Clamp. Clamp. Suture. The blood pressure on Park's monitor hesitated. Held. Then began, very slowly, to climb. There we go, Park said. The relief in his voice was professional and genuine in equal measure. Coming back up, 82, 86. Hold, Nakamura said, working. Hold. 91, Park said. 94, Nakamura exhaled, slow, controlled. The sound of a person releasing a breath they'd been holding for 3 minutes. All right, she said, we have it. She looked briefly at the circulating nurse, log the secondary repair, and get me a good look at the field before we close. The room resettled. The rhythm came back. The percussion of the work returned to its normal register. Nakamura glanced at Elena over the sterile field. She said nothing for a moment. Then, good eyes on that CT this morning. Thank you, Elena said. Go wait outside, Nakamura said, not unkindly. I'll come out when we're done. Elena went back to the periphery. She stood there, and her hands were steady, and her breathing was even. And she had been in enough of these rooms to know that steady hands and even breathing were choices rather than conditions, achieved through repetition and will rather than the absence of fear. She knew what 78 systolic meant. She knew what the secondary bleed had looked like on that monitor. She knew how close the margin had been. She also knew it had held, and that it had held partly because she'd looked at that CT image at 10:04 in the morning and noticed a collateral vessel that hadn't been the main concern but had registered in the back of her mind with the specific, quiet alarm of something that might matter later. It had mattered later. It was 1:34 p.m. She was standing in the hallway outside the OR when Chen found her. Chen had that expression again, the careful one. Elena's stomach tightened. What now? Elena said, not a question. Holt filed the formal protocol review, Chen said. It's going through the department chief now. They're saying the CT order and the pre-op staging. She stopped, looked around, lowered her voice. Elena, they're talking about suspension pending review. Elena stood very still. The patient went into a secondary bleed during surgery, she said. A secondary bleed on the exact vessel collateral I identified on that CT at 10 this morning. If that imaging hadn't been done when it was, Nakamura would have been walking in there without that information. I know, Chen said. Does Holt know? I don't think he knows about the secondary bleed yet, Chen said. He filed the review before the surgery finished. Elena looked at the OR doors. How formal is formal? Department chief wants you in his office at 3 p.m. today. Elena breathed in, breathed out. 3 p.m. That was 90 minutes away. Nakamura would be done by then. Marcus would be in recovery. He would be stable, or he wouldn't. In either way, she'd be walking into an administrator's office to answer for a decision that had just been proven right in the most consequential possible terms. Okay, she said. Elena, I'll be there, she said. Tell them I'll be there. She went back to her position outside the OR doors and waited. At 2:11 p.m., Nakamura came through the doors, mask pulled down, expression composed and clear. She looked at Elena directly. He's stable, she said. Good repair. Pressure's holding. Park is happy with the anesthetic emergence. She paused. The secondary bleed complicated things. If I'd gone in without knowing about that collateral, the outcome would have been different. She was very straightforward about it, the way Nakamura was straightforward about everything. Your CT call this morning was right. Thank you, Elena said. I'm going to tell that to the department chief, Nakamura said. I heard about Holt's review. I'll be putting my name on a statement. Elena blinked. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, Nakamura said. I'm doing it because it's accurate and because this facility cannot afford to discourage the kind of clinical instinct you demonstrated this morning by burying it in paperwork. She held Elena's gaze. You fought for the right thing. So will I. Then she was gone, moving down the corridor with that economical, purposeful stride. And Elena stood for a moment in her wake, feeling something she hadn't had time to feel all day. Not relief, exactly. Something more complicated and more fragile than relief. Recovery was on the 3rd floor. Marcus arrived there at 2:24 p.m., still under the last edge of the anesthesia, pale but stable, his pressure climbing toward a number that Nakamura called acceptable and Elena called a beginning. The recovery nurse, A solid, experienced man named Garrett, whom Elena had worked alongside for 6 years, set him up with the practiced ease of someone who'd received hundreds of patients from the OR and knew exactly what each one needed. Elena stood at the bedside. She watched Marcus's face for the specific changes that indicated emergence. The slight tightening around the eyes, the involuntary movement of the jaw, the way consciousness returns not all at once, but in layers, the outer ones first. At 2:41 p.m., Marcus moved his right hand. Then his head turned slightly. Then his eyes opened. Not all the way, the weighted half open of early emergence, and he looked at the ceiling for a moment before he found her. "Torres," he said. His voice was rough, dragged through the anesthetic, but it was his voice, controlled even now by reflex. "Here," she said. He blinked slowly. "Done?" "Done," she said. "Nakamura's happy with the repair. You're stable." He was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, "Complication, mid-surgery." Elena paused. "What makes you say that?" "Your face," he said. Even half sedated, half buried in post-anesthetic weight, the man was reading her face. "Something happened." "Secondary bleed," she said. "Nakamura caught it. It's repaired." His eyes closed briefly, then opened again. "The collateral vessel," he said. "From the CT." She stared at him. "You're not fully conscious." "I'm conscious enough," he said. "You flagged it this morning, on the imaging." He was slow, putting it together through the sedation with visible effort. "That's why you pointed at the CT." She hadn't known he'd seen that. He'd been under. But some part of his mind, apparently, had not been entirely under, and it had filed the information with the same automatic competence that seemed to operate in Marcus Blackwell, regardless of his state of consciousness. "Yes," she said. He looked at her. "It would have been a problem," he said. "It was a problem," she said, "for about 3 minutes. Then Nakamura solved it." "Because she had the imaging." "Because she had the imaging." He was quiet again. His right hand moved on the bed. Not reaching, just moving. She put her hand over it briefly, the way she did with patients coming out of anesthesia. A grounding gesture, something solid in the sensory fog. He didn't squeeze her hand the way she told him he'd done in 2010, but his fingers stilled under hers. "Claire," he said. "I'll check on her status," Elena said. "She was catching a flight from San Diego. She should land within the hour." "Tell her—" He stopped. The sedation was pulling at the edges of his sentences. "Tell her it went well, before she gets here. So she's not—" Another stop. "So she's not afraid when she walks in," Elena finished. "Yes," he said. "I'll call her," Elena said. She did, stepping out of the recovery bay for 3 minutes, reaching Claire Blackwell on her cell phone at the San Diego airport gate. Claire's voice was tightly wound, stretched thin with the specific anxiety of someone who has been managing alone for months and has just had the thing they were afraid of become real. Elena used the same tone she used for everything, not falsely bright, not dramatically solemn, just clear and direct and real. "The surgery went well," Elena said. "Dr. Nakamura repaired the vessel. He's stable and recovering. He's awake. His first words were about you." She heard Claire breathe on the other end. A long, shaky breath, the kind that holds 3 months of held breath inside it. Is he going to be okay?" Claire asked. "He's going to be fine," Elena said. "He's going to need recovery time, and he's going to be a difficult patient about it, and you're going to have to be firm with him, but he is going to be fine." A sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You know him?" "A little," Elena said. "I'm Elena Torres, his nurse today. I'll be here when you arrive." "Thank you," Claire said. It was the kind of thank you that carries more than itself. "Thank you so much." Elena came back to the recovery bay. Garrett was checking readings. Marcus was more present now, the sedation thinning, his eyes clearer, his breathing evening out towards something approaching normal. He looked at her when she came in. "Well?" "She's boarding in 20 minutes, Elena said. "She knows you're stable." Something moved in his face. Relief, yes, but also something that was harder to name. The particular emotion of a parent who has been trying not to need their child and has just been reminded that the need runs both ways. "Thank you," he said, directly, without qualification. "You said that already," Elena said, settling into the chair beside the bed. "I know," he said. "I meant it again." It was 2:58 p.m. In 2 minutes, Elena had a meeting with the department chief in an office 2 floors up. She knew it. She had not mentioned it. Marcus's eyes moved to her face with that same reading the field precision that he'd used all day. "What time is it?" he said. "Almost 3, she said. "You have somewhere to be," he said. "Nothing important," she said. He looked at her steadily. "Elena." She met his eyes. "The protocol review," he said. It wasn't a question. She inhaled carefully. "How did you—" "I heard Holt in the room this morning," Marcus said. "And I know how hospitals work. I know how administrators work." His voice was still rough from the anesthesia, but the authority in it was intact, was apparently structural, was not a thing that sedation could entirely reach. "He filed it." "He did," she said. "When's the meeting?" 3 o'clock. Marcus pushed himself slightly more upright against the pillows. The movement cost him. His face showed it briefly, but he didn't stop. "Call Nakamura," he said. "She's already writing a statement." "Call her now," Marcus said, "and get me a phone." "Marcus, you are 2 hours out of surgery." "Get me a phone," he said again, not loudly, not harshly, with the absolute quiet certainty of a man who has made a decision and is not interested in the counter-argument. "I made a promise this morning about your career. I intend to keep it." Elena looked at him for a moment. He was pale, hooked to monitors, 2 hours removed from a vascular repair and a secondary bleed that had scared everyone in the OR for 3 minutes. He was also, unmistakably, entirely himself. The man who had walked through those hospital doors at 7:42 in the morning, with his spine straight and his jaw set and his medals in a row. The man who had spent 36 years being the person other people turned to. The man who had twisted an orderly's wrist and dared an entire hospital to come closer. The man who had sat in an exam room and quietly told the truth about his own fear to a woman he barely remembered, but somehow, improbably, trusted. He was all of those things simultaneously. She was beginning to understand that. There was no version of Marcus Blackwell that was just the armor. There was no version that was just the vulnerability underneath. He was the whole thing, all at once, and the whole thing was looking at her right now and asking for a phone. She reached into her pocket and handed him her own. He looked at it briefly. Then he dialed a number from memory, a number he'd apparently carried in his head the way he carried everything, efficiently and without waste. It rang twice. "Patterson," said the voice on the other end. Even through the phone, across the room, Elena could hear the command register of it. "Sir," Marcus said, "it's Blackwell. I apologize for the briefing. I'm calling from post-operative recovery at Pearl Harbor." A brief pause. "Yes, sir, the surgery went well. I'll be back on my feet within the week." Another pause, during which Elena heard Patterson's voice but not the words. "I understand, sir. I'll make it up to you. But first I need 30 seconds of your time on a separate matter." Marcus looked at Elena as he said it, directly, the way he'd looked at her all day, like she was real, like she was worth the full attention, like she was something other than background. "There is a nurse at this facility whose clinical instincts saved my life this morning, who is currently facing a bureaucratic review for the decisions that did it. I need your office to make one call to the facility administrator. That's all. Just one call." He listened. "Yes, sir, that's correct." He listened again. His expression remained composed. Then, Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. He ended the call. He held the phone out to Elena. She took it. He'll call within the hour, Marcus said. She stood looking at him. Vice Admiral Patterson is going to call Holt's office, she said. Yes, Marcus said, because you asked him to. Because it's the right call, Marcus said, and because Patterson has been waiting for an opportunity to remind Holt that this is a military medical facility and the clinical staff who serve veterans deserve more than protocol citations. He leaned back slightly against the pillow, the energy of the call already costing him against the background of the surgery. Patterson has his own opinions about Holt. I simply gave them a place to land. Elena stood with the phone in her hand. She looked at this man, this infuriating, rigid, complicated, genuinely remarkable man who had come in that morning as a wall and was lying here now as something considerably more human and considerably more interesting. And she felt something that she was not going to name right now, not in a recovery bay 2 hours post-op, with Garrett doing readings 6 feet away and Claire Blackwell landing at the airport in 40 minutes. But she felt it. You need to rest, she said. I know, he said. I mean, actually rest. Not strategize. Not make calls. Not manage outcomes from a hospital bed. I understand, he said. Do you? She said, and the corner of his mouth moved, just barely, the ghost of something. The first real approximation of a smile she'd seen from him all day, and it changed his face more than she'd expected, made him look briefly, startlingly like the version of himself that existed before the armor went on in the morning, before the rank was picked up and the responsibility was shouldered and the world became a thing to command. Probably not, he said, but I'll try. Garrett looked up from the monitor. He met Elena's eyes with the mild, experienced expression of a man who had seen many things in many recovery bays and added this one to the list without apparent surprise. Pressure's 108/70 and climbing, he said, looking good. Good, Elena said. She sat back down in the chair beside the bed. Then I'll stay until Claire gets here. You have a meeting at 3, Marcus said. I'll be late, Elena said. He looked at her. You can't be late to a disciplinary. I've been late before, she said. I survived. She settled into the chair. Go to sleep, Marcus. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he closed his eyes. And outside the recovery bay, the hospital moved in its ordinary rhythms. And somewhere in an administrator's office, a phone was about to ring with a call from the Pacific Fleet Commander's office. And somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, Claire Blackwell was on a plane watching the clouds and breathing carefully and thinking about her father. And in the OR, Dr. Nakamura was scrubbing out and writing a statement that was going to be very direct and very thorough. And in the recovery bay, Marcus Blackwell was asleep, finally, genuinely asleep, for the first time in months without the company of pain. And Elena Torres sat beside him, and she did not go anywhere, and the afternoon moved quietly around them both. Claire Blackwell arrived at 3:47 p.m. Elena heard her before she saw her, the quick, purposeful footsteps in the corridor, the slightly elevated breathing of someone who has been holding themselves together across 5 hours of airports and anxiety, and is now 20 feet from the thing they've been holding themselves together for. Elena stepped out of the recovery bay just as Claire came around the corner. She was young, early 30s, her father's directness in her face, her mother's something else in the set of her mouth. 7 months of pregnancy carried with the particular, focused physicality of a woman who had been managing alone and had made her body an act of will. She had a bag over one shoulder, and her eyes were scanning the corridor with the same reading the field intensity Marcus used. And when those eyes found Elena, they stopped. Torres? Claire said. Yes, Elena said. He's awake. He's stable. His pressure is at 112/74, and Nakamura is calling it a clean outcome. She said it all immediately, the most important things first, because that was what Claire needed, and because Elena had been doing this long enough to know that family members in corridors outside recovery bays need the numbers before they need anything else. Claire exhaled, the sound of 5 hours of compressed fear leaving the body in one breath. "Can I see him?" she said. "Yes," Elena said. "He's been asking about you since he woke up." She paused. "He hasn't said that directly, but he's checked the time 4 times in the last 40 minutes, and every time he does it, he looks at the door." That's the same thing. Something moved in Claire's face. Recognition. A daughter recognizing her father in a description, the particular language of a man who shows things sideways rather than straight. "That's him," she said. "I know," Elena said, and she stepped aside to let Claire through. She didn't follow. She stood in the corridor and gave them the room, the way she'd been giving Marcus room all day, not disappearing, just stepping back to the edge of things where presence and privacy could coexist. She heard Claire's voice go slightly unsteady when she came through the door, heard Marcus say her name, heard the particular quality of silence that follows when two people who have been afraid for each other are finally in the same room. She went to the nurse's station and checked her messages. 3 missed calls from Chen, 1 from Dr. Wallace, the department chief whose office she had not gone to at 3 o'clock. 1 from a number she didn't recognize. She called the unknown number back. It rang once. "This is Commander Reyes, Office of Vice Admiral Patterson." The voice was brisk and professional. "Am I speaking with Elena Torres, RN?" Elena straightened slightly without meaning to. "Yes. I'm calling to inform you that Vice Admiral Patterson has spoken directly with Director Holt at Naval Medical Center Pearl Harbor regarding the protocol review filed against you this afternoon." A brief pause, not for effect, just for the clean delivery of the next sentence. "The review has been withdrawn. Director Holt will be issuing a written acknowledgement of your clinical judgment in the Blackwell case. The Vice Admiral wanted you to have that information directly." Elena stood very still. "Thank you," she said. "Dr. Nakamura's statement was also received," Reyes said, "regarding the secondary bleed and the imaging you identified. The Vice Admiral found it relevant." "I appreciate that," Elena said. "The Vice Admiral also asked me to pass on a message personally." Another brief pause. "He said to tell you, and I'm quoting directly here, that Colonel Blackwell does not use words like saved my life for anyone who didn't earn them. Congratulations, Miss Torres." The call ended. Elena held the phone for a moment. She set it down on the counter carefully, as if it were something that might break. Garrett, passing behind her with a chart, glanced at her face. "Good news?" he said. "Yes," she said, and then after a second, "Yes." She went back to the recovery bay. Marcus was awake, more alert now. His color improved, the particular flatness of heavy sedation fully lifted from his face. Claire was sitting in the chair Elena had vacated, one hand wrapped around her father's, her other hand resting on the curve of her pregnancy. She looked up when Elena came in. Marcus looked at Elena with the question in his eyes before she'd said a word. "Patterson's office called," she said. "The review is withdrawn. Holt is issuing a written acknowledgement." Something moved in Marcus's expression. Not surprise. He had made that call expecting it to work, because Marcus Blackwell did not make calls he expected to fail. But there was something underneath the lack of surprise. Satisfaction, partly, and something quieter. The look of a man who has done the thing he said he would do and finds, in the doing of it, that it matters more than he'd anticipated. "Good," he said. "You didn't have to," Elena started. "I did," Marcus said. The same words he'd used that morning, in the same quiet tone. "Finished." Claire was looking between them with the perceptive, slightly amused expression of a person watching a dynamic they don't fully have the context for, but are assembling quickly. She had her father's instincts. She was already reading something in the way these two people talked to each other. The specific shorthand of it. The way certain words landed between them with more weight than their syllables accounted for. "How long have you two known each other?" Claire asked. Marcus and Elena looked at each other. Since this morning, Elena said. Claire looked at her father. That's not what it looks like, she said. It's complicated, Marcus said. Try me, Claire said. I've been on a plane for 5 hours with nothing to do but worry. I have time, so Marcus told her. Slowly, with the careful precision of a man recounting something he was still in the process of understanding himself. Sangin Valley, 2010. The medevac. The voice through the sedation that he'd thought was a dream. The commendation filed through channels that he'd never known had been received. And then this morning, the waiting room, a nurse with a chart who hadn't flinched. Claire listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She looked at Elena. You saved his life twice, she said, and the first time, he didn't even know your name. That's how it usually works, Elena said. It shouldn't be, Claire said. There was something fierce in it, the fierceness of a daughter who has almost lost her father today and is now recalibrating the near misses that preceded it. People should know the names of the people who kept them alive. Elena looked at her. Sometimes they do, she said. Eventually. It was 4:22 p.m. Dr. Nakamura came through at 4:35, still in her post-OR mode. Efficient, direct, closing loops. She looked at Marcus's chart, reviewed the readings with Garrett, asked Marcus 3 clinical questions and received 3 direct answers, and pronounced herself satisfied with his trajectory. She would want him in-house for 48 hours minimum. She expected no complications. She would see him in the morning. Then she looked at Elena. Walk with me for a minute. They went into the corridor. Nakamura moved a few steps from the door and turned. Holt came to see me, she said. Elena waited. He wanted to discuss the protocol review before it was withdrawn. He seemed to be under the impression that I would sympathize with the documentation angle. She paused with the measured timing of someone who appreciates a clean delivery. He was mistaken. What did you tell him? Elena said. I told him that documentation is a record of clinical decisions, not a substitute for them, Nakamura said, and that a nurse who identifies a secondary vascular injury from morning intake imaging before the patient is on the table is not a documentation problem. She's an asset. She looked at Elena steadily. I also told him that I would be recommending you for the facility's clinical excellence review. It's a formal process. It goes on your permanent record. Elena blinked. Yuki, I know you didn't ask for it, Nakamura said. You never ask. That's why someone has to do it for you. She turned to go, then stopped. You've been here 11 years, Elena. You've done this work for 11 years with the skill level of someone who should have been promoted out of this bay and into a clinical leadership position 8 years ago. If you want that, it's time to stop being modest about what you're capable of. She looked back. Think about it. She walked away. Elena stood in the corridor looking after her. 11 years. She had not thought of them as 11 years of not advancing. She had thought of them as 11 years of the work she wanted to do, in the place she wanted to do it, with the patients who needed the specific things she had to offer. But Nakamura's words landed with the particular weight of a true thing said by someone who had been watching from close enough to see it clearly. She went back into the recovery bay. Marcus was looking at her when she came in. Claire had gotten up to find coffee, and the room was briefly theirs again, the way it had been theirs all day in that specific, unplanned way. She's recommending you for clinical excellence review, he said. Elena stopped. How did you? I could see you through the window in the door, he said. I read faces, remember? You read faces through sedation and glass, Elena said. I'm thorough, he said. He held her gaze. It's the right call, the recommendation. You don't know my career, Elena said. I know enough, he said. I know what I saw today. I know what you did 14 years ago. I know how those two things fit together into a picture of someone who has been doing exceptional work and letting other people file the paperwork about it. He was quiet for a beat. Don't let them keep filing it, Elena. Let them say it to your face for once. She stood looking at him. When did you become interested in my career development? Approximately 2 minutes after you told me to sit down in a waiting room I didn't want to be in, he said. And this time the ghost of a smile was less of a ghost. It was more present, warmer, a real thing reaching the surface of a face that had been holding it back all day through pain and pride in the accumulated architecture of a man who had learned very early that showing things was a kind of exposure. It was such a different face from the one that had seized an orderly's wrist at 7:42 this morning. Same man, entirely different weight. "How's your pain?" she said. "Manageable," he said. "Scale of 1 to 10, she said. 4, he said. "That's honest," she said. "I've been working on honesty," he said. "It's a recent development." She moved to the monitor, checked the readings. Garrett had done a full set 20 minutes ago, and everything was tracking in the right direction. She made a note. She was aware, in the periphery of her attention, of Marcus watching her work with an attentiveness that was different from the evaluative, defensive watchfulness he'd used in the waiting room. This was something else. Curiosity partly, gratitude partly, and something that was neither of those things but lived in the same neighborhood. She didn't address it. She filed it in the same place she'd been filing certain things all day, in the category of real things that deserve proper attention when the immediate work was done. Not avoided, just held, carefully, until the right moment. Claire came back with 2 coffees and a look on her face that suggested she had done some thinking in the hallway. She handed one to Elena without being asked, which meant she'd been thinking specifically about Elena, which meant she'd been assembling the picture her father had given her and drawing her own conclusions. "Sit down," Claire said to Elena. "You've been on your feet since before 7 this morning. Sit." "I have other patients," Elena started. "Garrett has your other patients," Claire said. She had her father's voice when she wanted to, the absolute flat certainty of it. "Sit down for 5 minutes." Elena sat down. The 3 of them were quiet for a moment. The monitors made their soft sounds. Somewhere down the hall, someone was being paged. The ordinary percussion of the hospital persisted in its ordinary way, indifferent to the specific gravity of what had happened in this room and adjacent to it over the last 9 hours. "Dad," Claire said, looking at her father with the direct, searching attention of a daughter who has decided something. "When you're discharged, you're not going back to your quarters alone." Marcus opened his mouth. "No," Claire said. He closed it. "You're coming to San Diego," she said, "at least until I know you're genuinely recovering and not just reporting that you're recovering, which is not the same thing, and we both know it." She held his gaze. "James gets back in 6 weeks. The house has a guest room. You're coming." Marcus looked at his daughter for a long moment. The man who had told an admiral no 17 times in his career. The man who had argued in a burning vehicle about evacuation order. The man who had walked into this hospital alone and dared anyone to help him. "All right," he said. Claire looked briefly startled, as if she'd prepared for more resistance. "All right?" "All right," he said. "You shouldn't be alone for the last weeks of the pregnancy, and I need—" He paused. The word was clearly one he was selecting with care, maybe for the first time in a long time. "I need to recover properly, not on my own schedule." Claire's eyes went bright for a moment. She looked down at her coffee, blinked. "Okay," she said. Her voice was slightly unsteady. "Okay, good." Elena looked at her hands. It was 5:11 p.m. At 5:30, Garrett came in to do a full assessment, and Elena stepped out. She went to the nurse's station, completed the chart documentation for Marcus's case, the full accounting of the day, every decision in reading and clinical judgment, all of it committed to the official record with a thoroughness that was both her professional obligation and today a form of testimony. She wrote it the way she wrote every chart, clearly, completely, without self-justification but without omission. The facts told the story. The facts always told the story if you wrote them down honestly. She was finishing when she heard footsteps. measured, deliberate, familiar now in a single day the way certain rhythms become familiar quickly when you've spent enough hours paying close attention. She looked up. Marcus was in the doorway of the recovery bay. He was in a hospital gown with an IV stand beside him, and he was pale and moving with the careful economy of someone who is well aware of the 4-inch incision in the newly repaired vessel wall and is operating within those constraints by choice rather than incapacity. Garrett was 3 steps behind him with an expression that said, "This patient announced he was getting up, and I made a clinical judgment that fighting him would cost more energy than it was worth." "You should be in bed," Elena said. "I know," Marcus said. He came to the counter and stopped, the IV stand settling beside him. He looked at her chart. "Finishing the documentation?" "Yes." "Write it clearly," he said. "Every call you made, every reason. I want it in the record." "It already is," she said. "It always is. That's how documentation works." "I know how documentation works," he said. "I wanted you to hear me say it." He looked at her directly. "I want there to be a record, not just of what happened today medically, of what you did, who you are in this building, and what this building has in you." Elena set down her pen. She looked at this man who had come in at 7:42 in the morning as a force of nature pointed in the wrong direction, and who was now standing at her nurse's station 9 hours later, connected to an IV pole and a recently repaired iliac vein, saying the thing that went on record and meaning it with every line of his still rigid, still marine, still entirely himself posture. 11 years ago, she said quietly, when I took this position at Pearl Harbor, I told the department chief that I wanted to work with veterans because I understood their context. She paused. What I didn't say, because I didn't have the words for it clearly yet, was that I also needed it. The work. This specific work. Because after Leatherneck, after everything I saw there, I needed to know that the people I helped in those conditions, that they were okay, that they came back and had lives. She looked at him. I never knew about you. I had no way of knowing. You were medevaced out and the deployment rotated, and that was how it worked. I know, Marcus said. I've thought about that night many times, she said. Professionally, medically, the specific clinical problem of it, the secondary bleed, whether we'd caught it early enough. But also just, I wondered, whether the patient on that table had made it back to his life. He did, Marcus said. He made it back to his life. A pause. Not always gracefully, but he made it. Yes, Elena said, I can see that. Something passed between them, the full accounting of 2 people who have arrived at the same place from different directions, who have carried the same thread without knowing the other end was held, and who have now, improbably and specifically, found each other in the middle of an ordinary Tuesday morning in a hospital in Hawaii. I owe you something I should have said a long time ago, Marcus said. In 2010, if you'd been in that room for the commendation, if you'd been there to receive it directly, I would have told you that what you did wasn't just competent, it wasn't just skilled. He held her gaze with the full, unflinching directness he'd been using all day, except now there was nothing defended behind it. You saved my life because you were paying attention when no one else was, because you cared enough about the specific person on that table to look harder than the job required. A pause. That's not a clinical skill. That's a quality of character, and I should have told you that then. Elena was very still. You're telling me now, she said. I'm telling you now, he said. The nurse's station was quiet. The corridor moved around them. Garrett had retreated diplomatically toward the bay. The afternoon light had shifted toward evening. Elena picked up her pen. She looked at the chart, then she looked back at him. Go back to bed, Marcus, she said, not harshly, with the specific warmth of someone who knows the person well enough now to use the direct form without it being a weapon. You have a vascular repair that is 4 hours old, and a daughter 40 feet away who has been managing alone for months, and does not need to watch her father fall down at the nurse's station. "I'm not going to fall," he said. "You won't," she agreed, "because you're going to walk back to that bed right now, and I'm going to finish this documentation, and then I'm going to do my final check, and then I'm going to go home." She met his eyes. "And in the morning, I'll be here." He looked at her for a moment. "Tomorrow," he said. "I'm on shift at 7, she said. "Then I'll see you at 7, he said. He turned and walked back toward the bay, IB stand rolling beside him, and Elena watched him go with the look of someone who has seen many things in 11 years of this work and is adding this particular thing to the list with a different quality of attention than most. Garrett appeared beside her. He looked at the departing figure of Marcus Blackwell, navigating the corridor with wounded dignity and absolute determination. And then he looked at Elena, and he said nothing, which was its own kind of statement. "Chart," Elena said, and went back to writing. It was 6:08 p.m. when she finished the documentation. She did a final round, checked Marcus's pressure one last time, found it at 118/76, exchanged a look with Garrett that confirmed they were both satisfied with the trajectory, checked on her 2 other patients down the hall, and then went to the locker room, changed out of her scrubs, and stood for a moment in the quiet before she left. She thought about what Nakamura had said: clinical leadership, the recommendation, 11 years. She thought about what Marcus had said: let them say it to your face for once. She thought about 2010, the dark of the trauma bay, the drop in blood pressure that nobody else had flagged, the argument with Dr. Kaufman that she had lost on the night and won eventually, 40 minutes later, when there was no longer a choice. She thought about the commendation arriving 8 months later in an envelope forwarded through 3 bases, the signature at the bottom a name she'd filed carefully in the part of her mind where she kept things that mattered, not knowing he was still walking around with a fragment of that night embedded in his body, not knowing the thread between them was still live. She thought about 7:42 this morning, the man at the intake desk, the fury and the pain and the absolute refusal to be seen. She thought about 2:41 p.m., his eyes opening in recovery, finding her face first before anything else. She picked up her bag and walked out of the locker room. She went back past the recovery bay. The door was open. Marcus was asleep, genuinely asleep, the monitors steady and green. Claire was in the chair beside him, one hand resting on her father's arm, her head tilted back, asleep herself, the 2 of them finally in the same room, and both of them resting, all the held breath of the day released. Elena stood in the doorway for just a moment. She didn't go in, she just looked. Then she turned and walked down the corridor, through the bay doors, past the nurse's station, past the intake desk where Dana Phelps was finishing the evening shift, and looked up briefly and said goodnight. Past the waiting room where this morning's events had started in fury, in pain, and absolute refusal. Through the front doors and into the evening air. She stood outside the hospital and breathed. Tomorrow at 7 o'clock, Marcus Blackwell would be in that recovery bay, difficult and direct and entirely himself, and she would walk in with his chart and he would read her face before she said a word, and the work would continue, and the conversation would continue, and the thing between them that had no name yet, but was real and specific and 14 years in the making would continue with it. For now, she stood in the evening and breathed, and behind her the hospital moved and breathed as it always did. And 14 years of a thread she hadn't known she was holding had finally, completely found its other end. Some debts don't get paid on the night. Some of them travel across years, in deployments, in ocean distances, and arrive exactly when they need to, carried by the specific gravity of 2 people who were never done with each other's story, and whose courage, each in their own way, in their own kind of uniform, had always been the truest thing about them. And in a recovery bay on the 3rd floor of Naval Medical Center, Pearl Harbor, a Marine colonel who had walked in that morning refusing to be saved was sleeping soundly. Finally, because someone had refused to stop saving him. That was enough. That was everything.